Now, we've heard an awful lot recently in the wake of the Jimmy Savile scandal about men who are accused of the sexual abuse of children. We rarely hear that a woman may have been involved. But Childline say that some 17% of children who call them about sexual abuse say the perpetrator is a woman. Bill was taken into care at the age of 3 and suffered both physical and sexual abuse at the hands of foster mothers. He told me earlier this morning how the abuse began in the first children's home.
My first memory was of being caned across the back because I was walking up the stairs incorrectly. As you do, you step up one step at a time when you're very young, and you bring the other leg up, and then so on and so forth. And I remember being caned for that. And
then you were fostered when you were 6 for a longer placement.
That's right, for 11 years, yeah.
And so this is where the sexual abuse began. How did that foster mother treat you?
I think the sexual abuse was part of a whole behaviours towards me and my brother and sisters, in terms of there was physical abuse, there was mental abuse, and there was sexual abuse. So I think it was all about power and control.
When you say it was sexual abuse, obviously I don't want you to go into great detail.
Indeed.
But what sort of things would happen?
Okay, there was no interference with me bodily. It was the other way round. So I was required to bathe her inappropriately. So
when you were a very, very little boy, yes?
I would have been 6 or 7.
And what do you remember of your feelings about it, even though it's such a long time ago and you were so little?
It's all extremely vivid. I can remember every detail about the bathroom, the floor, how high the handles seemed to be on the door, the Moby Dick painting that we did on the bathroom wall. Just vivid memories. Interestingly, at the time, it didn't seem wrong, because how at that age are you to determine what is right and what is wrong? Your boundaries aren't set. There is no right or wrong about anything. It was only in later years, once the moral standards have been defined as part of a growing adult, that you realise that what went on previously was entirely inappropriate, incorrect, and formed part of the abuse.
She was also physically abusive.
Yes.
What did teachers at school make of it? Because they must have known there was something wrong.
They did. In my primary school, I was touched on the back by a teacher, and I flinched, and I was asked to show my back, which was black and blue from top to bottom, and in those days they did nothing. It was ignored.
Why did you never tell anybody about it?
Well, the only way I could articulate my anger and distress was by running away, which I did on several occasions. On one occasion at the age of 12, cycling 70 miles.
And then you were
just
brought
to be
back.
Immediately returned, yeah.
Now, it went on for 10 years. How did you confront her when you were 16?
She hit me one last time, and at the time I was on Saturdays working in a sort of in a garden centre, throwing around 100-weight sacks of wheat all day, so I was quite strong. And I just turned to her and said, "If you touch me again, I will kill you." And I meant it.
And what was her response, Bill?
There was no response, nothing. I think there was just shock on her face. I remember it. I walked out of the front door, went for a walk and came back. It was never mentioned again. And shortly after that I joined the Navy, which was fantastic, moving from a negative institution to a marvellous positive one. But
what's been the lasting impact of that relationship on you, and particularly your relationships with other women?
Oh, that's such a good question, Jenny. How do I say this? I realised later on that as a young man in the Navy, sex came into things, and as far as I was concerned, I used women for sex, and that was it. I found it really difficult to establish a normalised relationship with a woman. I hated women, but I didn't hate all women. I just had a deep-rooted fear of women, and I think that led me to be very introspective about my relationship. I couldn't give all of myself. I got married at the age of 24 as soon as I left the Navy, and there is no doubt that I loved my first wife, and I still do. We're still in contact, and she's a lovely woman. However, I couldn't give myself to her. How do I explain this? I could not give all of myself. I couldn't give the trust that she deserved. Our relationship broke down after 6 years because there was nothing in it for us, and I've now been married, just coming up for 25 years, to my second wife. And even then I struggled, but after 25 years of marriage, and I believe we have a deep, loving, caring relationship because we both shared difficult childhoods, so we had a lot in common, and that's helped a lot.
At what point, Bill, did you decide, I can talk about this, I can talk about this woman?
Well, I founded a software company that helps children, or helps vulnerable children, and monitors what's happening on their computers. And that is when I was able to talk about it. I was asked, what is the reason for founding the company? And I thought, well, the reason is I was abused in childhood. I have to do something positive to try and make sure that other children who are suffering abuse can A, communicate with others and reach out and know who to reach out to, and also without necessarily having to blow the whistle, which I did and I was punished for every time I ran away, without having to blow the whistle, can receive professional help, guidance and support.
I was talking to Bill. But why is it so rare to hear about women who abuse children in their care, and what are the consequences for children if we don't accept that it happens? Well, Dr. Jackie Turton is a senior lecturer in criminology at Essex University and contributor to a new book about children's lives. Claire Lilley is a senior analyst at the NSPCC's strategy unit. Claire, who are the women doing this kind of thing? What do we know about them?
Well, of those children who call Childline about child sexual abuse, as you said, 17% identify that it's a female abuser, and of those, 60% of cases it's the mother. So mothers are, the majority of abusers, but that's still very, very small numbers. I'd really emphasise that what we're talking about is very small numbers, and even smaller numbers, really minuscule, are where the aunt is involved, a sister, a stepmother or a grandmother, and then even smaller numbers than that are stepsister, a female school friend, a foster mother.
We've always sort of said in the past that, any woman who is a physical abuser or a sexual abuser is being coerced into this by a man. That's not necessarily the case, is it?
No, it's not true. And the typologies that have been developed are developed based on very small numbers. And there is some research evidence that in about half of cases there is a man involved, whether as an equal partner or whether coercing the woman into the sexual abuse. But it is the case that there are women who do independently abuse children.
And who's most at risk, boys or girls?
Boys, much more so. Of the calls to Childline, about 20% was boys, and just 4% of girls being abused by a female.
Now, Jackie, from listening to Bill, it's obviously extraordinarily difficult for a child to reveal that this is happening, particularly when it's a woman who's involved. Why is that?
Well, as you can hear from Bill's story, he tried to tell. He actually had other people or other professionals had an opportunity to actually find out that he had been abused, but actually it was pointless. And so in the end, he stopped trying to discuss this with people outside. And that's one of the things the research has found, that people who've been abused, children who've been abused, don't tell, because actually there's no point in telling. They're a bit worried about telling because their story won't be believed. They're concerned about who to trust with the story. In terms of children who've been abused by women, particularly children who've been abused by their mother or mother figure, then you've got a child who has to tell a story that's really hard to hear, really hard to listen to. So they've got to find somebody who believe them, but on the other hand won't overreact in a way that's inappropriate.
But why do we seem to find it so hard to accept that a woman can sexually abuse a child, whereas we can accept that it might happen if it's a man?
Well, it's part of the way we see women in our society. We see women as rather mother figures, as actually mothers, or as who have a nurturing nature, if that's an appropriate way to put it. And motherhood is rather has an iconic status still. And we find it really difficult to understand mothers who don't love their children or who want to harm their children in any way. I think that's one stumbling block. I think another stumbling block we have is very much what harm can they do anyway. It's rather harmless rite of passage in terms of women and young boys, maybe.
There might even be some boys who would say, "Whoa, that was a stroke of luck, mate."
Well, certainly there have been cases where men have said, well, actually it wasn't a problem for me, but I'm not entirely convinced that it wasn't a problem for them. It was maybe that they hadn't actually come to accept the fact that this was abusive.
Claire, since it has been relatively hidden, how conscious are professionals that they might consider an abuser might be a woman?
Well, I think there is some evidence that professionals have been reluctant to engage with the fact that it could be a woman. I think intellectually they understand that it does happen. That it's been covered in training programs for professionals, but emotionally they find it really difficult to connect with that idea for much the same reasons as the rest of us do, because, professionals are human as well, and they also have all these very deep underlying social constructs, in their brain, all the things that have just been talked about the image of women as nurturing, but also traditional assumptions about women as not being sexually passive and not being sexually aggressive, for example.
How, Jackie, do you establish how common this might be? Because the figures are 17% from Childline, the fewer numbers if you look at other pieces of research. How do you establish how common it is if the victims are often very young and don't tell?
Well, I think it's really difficult. I think the figures are just a guideline. Measuring the prevalence of something like this is enormously hard. I think one of the key ways that has come out since the 1980s has been Childline, because children can ring up without identifying themselves, without identifying their families, with no danger of it being let out, and with no condemnation. So it's an opportunity for them to talk about it without actually the other dangers that they're worried about.
One of the things that you write about is the impact of media coverage. What impact does media coverage have on the way female abuse is regarded?
Well, I think there's a number of ways it impacts. I think the first thing is that the media tends to pick up on stranger abuse. It tends to pick up on, as we know, prolific abusers. It tends to pick up on cases that where deaths have occurred, and usually these are male strangers. Obviously outside of families, so not familial abuse, which is the most common. And then, of course, where they do pick up on women, then these women tend to be othered. In other words, what I mean by that is that they are seen as monsters, not feminine, not normal women, in some form or another. So we can actually discard them. They're not the people that we know next door.
So how, Claire, can we make it easier for children to tell that it may be a woman and be believed?
Well, I think we need to create safe spaces for them to talk about what's happening to them, and of course Childline is a really good place for them to do that. But it's also about the reaction they get when they do tell a trusted adult who's in their life. So to be a lot of children are scared of telling someone in case they aren't believed, in case that potentially means the loss of their mother figure. They don't want their family necessarily to break up, they just want the abuse to stop. A lot of children, when they reveal abuse, will initially say that it's been perpetrated by a man, and then later it'll come out that it's a woman. So creating safe spaces and believing children.
Claire Lilley and Dr. Jackie Turton, thank you both very much indeed. And if you need to talk to somebody about what we've been discussing, you can go to the Women's Hour website. There are organisations there that can help.